Well, hey, welcome to our third session. Again, I'm Dr. Stan, and we're talking about mourning to dancing. That is the process of really dealing with grief and loss from my book, Mourning to Dancing. And that's, again, available from booksbyvision.org if you haven't already gotten it. And/or you can find more information about it. We even have a course on not only on this, kind of a mini course, but also a full college course in the area of crisis counseling, dealing with domestic violence and things of that nature on vision.edu. And if you want to learn more about Uncle Dr. Stan here, it's drstandekoven.com. Hey, so the process, if you will, is what we want to talk about in dealing with or understanding even more grief and loss. And there were certain stages. Some of the greatest research that was done in the area of death and dying was done by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back in the 60s and 70s of the last century. And excellent work was done, and she came up with various stages. Well, I look at some stages of the grieving process as well with a little bit of a nuance. It's kind of my take on it. And I want to just start our time by looking at kind of the process, the stages of grief modified from the Kubler-Ross research. I'd mentioned this in our last session that oftentimes people start with a sense of shock. I mean, it's like, I cannot believe this really happened. Now, again, shock is a very normal thing and should last, if someone is really shocked by a loss, for hours, at the most a few days. If it goes beyond that, it really puts a person at risk in terms of their health. But it's very common for people to be kind of in a sense of shock, and I just want to cover, I just want to hide, I just want to be held, or I want to be left alone. It's because I'm just dealing with the impact itself of the accident, of the loss, of whatever they've experienced. And in most cases, what we need to be able to do is just, again, come alongside, listen to what they need at that moment. And most of the time, it's whether it's to be left alone or to be held or whatever it is, just to try and respond to that to the best of your ability. The second stage, which is commonly seen also with Kubler-Ross's work, is denial. Now, again, it's said, denial is not a river in Egypt. Denial is where one just will not accept that what has happened is actually true. Now, again, denial is not an unusual early stage in the grieving process. I can't believe this happened. Well, hey, and I wish it didn't. And you know what? I don't think it actually did. I mean, that level of denial, I don't think it really happened. I don't think they're really dead. I'm going to hear that things are different than what I thought they were. The layoff didn't really occur. That kind of denial is, again, not unusual, but it is a little bit of kind of borderline dissociative. That is, it's pulling out of reality. It's not dealing with things as they are. And that can be a very strong and important self-defense mechanism for people. So early denial it's okay. Give them room to deny as long as they need to, because they are going to eventually have to face the reality that they really have suffered this loss. I'm kind of reminded, a little bit of a twist on the story of the man and the woman in the garden. I mean, they were told very clearly, do not eat from this one tree, the fruit on that tree, because it's the tree of life, or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the day that you eat of it, in dying you will die, or you begin to die at the time that you eat that. Well, typically, I don't know how much the man and the woman knew about death, but they probably knew it wasn't a good thing. And so when they did eat, they did disobey. The woman was deceived, the man chose right there, standing there with her, and they realized, oops, we're naked and we're ashamed. And so they projected the blame for their circumstance, for the sin that they committed. They blamed it, the loss of their innocence, the loss of God's, if you will, protection over them, the loss of the beauty of the garden, all of that loss They denied responsibility, tried to project the blame, the man on God, actually, and then secondarily the woman on the devil. But they eventually faced the consequences, and when they did, they got on with life. So they didn't remain, if you will, in denial, or maybe in hopes and dreams, or just frightened that God actually would squash them like a cockroach. But anyway, whatever was going on with them, it's kind of a picture, if you will, of that early, we're going to project blame, we're going to focus the attention on something else, and we're not going to believe. We can't believe. I can't believe. Well, again, in those moments when they can't believe, it's not your job to rub their nose in it, but to, again, be there, come alongside, listen to them, recognize how difficult it is for them to be able or to properly face this. But they'll get to it normally, given time. The third phase I look at is fantasy versus dealing with the reality. That is, they will use their mind, they'll use their perception of reality to try and pretend as though things aren't the way that they are. And some of that really will continue, oftentimes for days and weeks. I mean, there'll be times when, I thought I heard their voice. I thought I saw them in a mall. I heard someone spoke to me and that reminded me of them, and therefore I know it was them speaking to me. Again, I'm not trying to deny that it's possible that, there's kind of a thin veil, I think, between our world and the spirit world, and that's all around us. But nonetheless, most of the time, it's not them, it's not their voice. But the fantasy can be very, very real to them. But in time, again, most people will naturally let go of the fantasy and embrace the reality that they really have lost a loved one or gone through this loss. And so with it, then, begins the connection of the emotions with the thoughts, with the event, etc. And that's really a part of this fantasy versus reality. I begin to embrace the reality of what I am seeing, what I've experienced, and I really begin the more active mourning process. Again, that's where, when reality sets in, you'll often see just the shoulders slump, and the countenance of the individual will change, and often a flood of tears will likely come. And especially, and I found often with men, that can be days or even weeks or months after the loss of a loved one. Because often, as men, we're supposed to fix things, we're supposed to take care of things. And so we go into automatic mode of taking care of everybody else, and we don't deal with our own emotions until a bit later, and then it hits. And when it does, often it'll hit like a huge wave. People wonder, what's going on with you? Well, what's going on is I'm finally experiencing the reality in all of its fullness. But all of that is a part of God's healing process in their lives. Ultimately, again, the next phase, if you will, or the next stage, is learning to live with the memories, learning to live with the loss, knowing that obviously my loved one's not coming back, and we must remember that memories can be mixed. I mean, the best of marriages was not perfect. The best parent was not a perfect parent. The best child was not a perfect child. So there can be mixed feelings in the individual's life. And so learning to live with the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly is an important part of the grieving, mourning process, which ultimately leads to acceptance and the affirmation that, sometimes life stinks. Then you die, if you're lucky. But God is good. You come to that place of the affirmation that God is still good. And life is still worth living. Even though I will never forget, and it's one of the things that you do want to help reassure people, you will never forget the one that you've given your heart to in the past. But you can learn to give your heart to another for the future. If you've loved once and you've loved well, you can love again, and you can love just as well. And so part of that acceptance, affirmation, it's really, really key. It's really critical. And so, in terms of helping people with the grieving process, I've put together just this little thing called it's admit, submit, commit. And I've got some scriptures that go with it. You'll see it in your PowerPoint, but let me just talk about this. When you're dealing with someone that has had a major loss, you want to help them in time. Again, not when they're in the middle of shock, not when they're in the middle of denial, but as they're beginning to come from fantasy to reality and deal with their feelings, to admit that they need help, to admit they need to grieve, to admit that they need to mourn, that really they need to admit their circumstance and situation and take ownership of their loss. It's not your loss, not my loss, it's their loss. And ultimately, the healing process requires that we admit that it really happened. It is profoundly what it is. I've lost, and yet I am not lost, and God has not left me, etc. But we have to be able to admit. Then the second is to submit. That is to be willing to say, I need help. I need to be able to talk this through. I need people in my life. I need to go through the grieving process. And sometimes that can best be done in small groups, like a grief share type of program. Sometimes it's best with an individual counselor. Oftentimes just friends and family that are patient to allow you to talk and talk and talk. But you got to submit yourself to a community, to a family, to people who are willing to come alongside and help you in the grieving process. We need that if we're going to really come to a place of acceptance and wholeness in God. And then really to commit. And the long-term goal, part of acceptance, is committing our lives again, submitting our lives and committing our lives again to the goodness of God. That, life happens, death happens. From the moment we're born, or I guess prenatally, we begin the dying process. It's going to catch up to all of us unless we're caught up with the Lord, as it were. So, bottom line is, we're going to go through it. And so if you can help people to admit, submit, and really ultimately commit their way, their purposes toward God, it makes just a huge difference. Hey, let me give you then 15 quick tips, and you'll see them there, that can help people in the mourning, in the grieving process. Number one, to help them to nurture their relationship with God. And I would say along with God, with others, especially godly people. Accept the grief and talk about the loss. Keep busy. Take care of yourself. Eat well. That's really important. Exercise is good. What I mean by exercise, just movement. I'm not talking about you need to hit the gym. No, get out and walk. Take some deep breaths. And that's where, if you're helping someone who's lost a loved one and gone through a major loss in their life, coming alongside of them and talking with them or listening more to them while they're taking a walk can really help. Help them to get rid of the guilt, rid yourself of the guilt, accept the loss, join a group if you need it, associate with friends. Friends are good, friends are important. You want to make sure you postpone any major decisions after a loss, because I'm telling you, a lot of bad decisions are made after a major loss. It's often helpful for a lot of people to journal, to write. One of the things I encourage people in the counseling process, especially if they have a delayed response to their grief, is to write letters to the ones that they've lost, including to write a letter in some cases to themselves, to let themselves off the hook and to forgive them. But writing sometimes can be extremely therapeutic for people, and I really encourage it. Helping them eventually to care for others can make a difference. And again, if you have long-term bereavement, well, perhaps you need to get some outside help from a trained professional therapist. Well, hey, in our next session, we're going to continue on talking about how to get through the process of grief and loss. It's, again, it's easier said than done, like most things in life, but you can get to the place where you can accept that, yes, though I've lost a loved one, I've gone through a horrible time, yet God is good, I'm going to be okay, and life is going to go on. Look forward to our next time.